Welcome to the Speculations reading series, a co-production of Dreamhaven Books and SF Minnesota, a multicultural speculative fiction organization which also hosts a midsummer convention DiversiCon. And this year it will be July 25th to 27th with guest of honor Charlie Jane Anders and Brian Kawara. Sign our guest book. Thank you. We will have a couple of upcoming readings soon. They'll be on Wednesdays. One of them will be the annual round robin reading. So, Jason, you've been reading the sixth now?
I've lost count.
Let's call it 7.
Sure.
It's our regular November readers. And there's short stories and novels and games.
Yep. Yeah, I have 2 games called. One of them is called Tile Chess, and the other is called Spooks, though that's out of print. They're both published by Steve Jackson Games, so yeah. If you want to,
Jason.
Yep, take it away. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. The audience outnumbers the entertainment, which is always good. So, let's see. For tonight, I think I'll start with a story. Let's see. None of the crit group is here, so. And this has been heavily advised since I submitted it to them anyway. So, this one is called Katrina, and it's a sort of a sequel to The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. She nudged her white mare into a swifter pace when she felt the first rain drop on her neck. The sky had been black since noon. Little wonder the housekeeper begged her not to go. But Katrina could not stay in that house a moment longer, and the reason could be seen on every wall. The deer heads and antlers mounted by the score since her father died. This was how Brom Van Brunt regarded his wife. As a quarry to be hunted down, and, what's caught, to be forgotten. Brom went out every night with his gang, just as he had before marrying. Why couldn't she? The downpour began, drenching her to the bone, plastering her auburn hair to her face. Lightning struck, and the horse shied. Katrina was good with horses, but the white mare came down on a rock or a hole in the road and fell, screaming in agony. Katrina fell out of her saddle, and pain lanced through her ankle. She screamed as well. She lay there in the mud and rain, surrounded by thunder and lightning and horses' screams. She summoned the will to pull herself to the horse's side. A flicker of lightning illuminated the horse's broken leg. Her heart quailed. She was 5 miles from home. The storm showed no sign of relenting. Then she heard hoofbeats, slow and heavy. The horse was black and huge, visible only when lightning coruscated the skies. The rider. She had heard what happened to Ichabod Crane, her former suitor. She believed it was Brom who scared him away, and that Ichabod, already rejected by Katrina, saw no reason to come back. Now, however, she heard a sword's unsheathing and panic struck like a thunderbolt. She scrambled backward through mud, knowing she could not escape. Her horse's scream ceased, and terror froze her. She heard the sword go back into its sheath. Lightning flickered again, and she saw the horseman standing over her. He was offering his hand. She must have sat there gaping longer than she realized, for presently the horseman turned away. But instead of remounting and riding off, he approached a tree with a long dead branch, which he broke off. He dropped it within Katrina's reach. Then he returned to his horse and put his foot in the stirrup. She looked down the road. 5 miles was a long way to crush through a thunderstorm. "Wait!" She heard a voice cry, and then realized the voice was hers. He stopped. Katrina used the tree branch to lever herself upright. "It was rude of me to refuse your help." She could not believe she was saying this. "Sir, would you please take me home?" When they arrived at her door, the horseman held her down and gave her the tree branch so she could support herself. Then he bowed to her, mounted up, and rode away. "Who was that?" the housekeeper asked. "I couldn't see him in the dark." Katrina was not ready to put what she had seen into words. "I've hurt my ankle. Would you help me, please?" The doctor said Katrina's ankle would be 3 weeks in healing. The housekeeper feared that Katrina had caught her death and fussed over her, piling on blankets, feeding her soup. This chafed Katrina to no end, no less than the walls of Antlers. Perhaps, unsurprisingly, her thoughts strayed to the horseman. When he had set her in the saddle and wrapped her in his cloak, he did not mount up behind her, but turned and made a sweeping gesture at the sky. The rain stopped. The thunder ceased, and black clouds dissipated to reveal a full moon floating in a sea of stars. Then he opened a bag in his saddle and drew out a violin. He set bow to strings and began walking down the road. The horse followed him. He was a good player, better even than that old fiddler who played at the quilting frolics. As Katrina's father used to say, he could make his instruments sing. She first thought he played merely to put her at ease and distract her from her pain. But then the spirits emerged along the road. Katrina thought she could name a few from the tales of the old Dutch wives. That must be the woman in white. That could only be Major Andre. And as they approached the road to enjoy the horseman's playing, they also looked to see who it was who rode his horse, not just in curiosity, but in welcome. The woman in white offered a warm smile as she curtsied. Major Andre removed his officer's cap as he bowed. Every ghost made some gesture of greeting as Katrina passed by, and she returned the smiles, though uneasily. She had not been the focus of this much attention since her wedding. It appeared that the horseman played to ease the spiritual exhaustion of these spectral souls. When at first a ghost emerged, Katrina always saw them wearing expressions of infinite world weariness. Then they heard the singing of the horseman's violin, and they smiled. Hearing the music, Katrina understood. It seized her soul, drew tears of joy from her eyes. She was not even sure she heard it with earthly ears as it soared through the night, making the very stars shimmer. She was not aware she was humming the horseman's tune until much later when the parson asked her, "When did you learn Bach?" She was working in the flower garden to distract herself from restlessness. "Beg pardon?" "That is Bach's Partita No. 3 for violin," said the parson. "Where did you hear it?" Katrina blinked. "Oh, well, that makes sense. I heard it from a fiddler as he passed down the road." "Truly? I don't suppose you learned his name?" Katrina shrugged. He wasn't very talkative. She spent as much time out of doors as possible, using that same tree branch to get about. The housekeeper fretted over her, reminding her of the doctor's orders, but Katrina would have none of it. When her ankle was almost fully healed, she looked forward to riding again, though she would have to find another horse. She would even consider riding to the marketplace again, though it was there that she heard the constant titters and whisperings of young women, instantly silenced when she looked in their direction, and informed her of just how far Brahm had strayed. "Mom!" The housekeeper ran to her, face white as death. "Oh, Mom!" "What is it?" "There's someone at the door, Mom." There was enough twilight to see by. Going to the front door, she saw the horseman. Beside his horse stood the white mare. Katrina was certain it was the same mare she had ridden that night, though she had been just as certain he had killed her. Yet here she was, same as before, except perhaps that she held her head somewhat higher. Looking closely, Katrina saw a scar where the sword had been thrust. The horseman had violin and bow in hand. He played the first few notes of Bach's Partita No. 3, then gestured down the road. It was an invitation. "No, Mum!" cried the housekeeper. "He'll never be seen again!" Katrina glanced at her. Then she mounted up, and they rode away. They took a different road this time. The horseman kept his violin, singing all the while. More Bach, Katrina guessed, as he led her down the lonely road to the covered bridge. She had heard of the horseman's inability to cross it, but he led her right through with no sign of concern. They emerged on the other side, and Katrina gasped in wonder. She saw mountains, steep and stately, rising toward the sky like spires. High above, feathery clouds shredded themselves on jagged peaks as they sailed on a constant, moaning wind. Forests of slender pines skirted the mountains almost to the snow line. Below all of this, a wide mirror lake reflected the snow. Below all of this, a wide mirror lake reflected the clouds and peaks. At the opposite end of the lake, tall and spindly like the mountains, a castle stood, scarlet banners flying from its towers. Katrina had heard that in life, the horseman was a Hessian mercenary. But this wasn't Hessia, was it? The horseman led her through the gates, which opened by no impetus Katrina could see. The castle was as beautiful within as it was without. Along every wall stood candelabra holding scores of candles. Along the walls hung gigantic paintings, some of landscapes, others of men and women of noble bearing. The horseman led her up her staircase in one of the towers, holding aloft a flaming torch. He also carried a saddlebag. What was it for? But Katrina could see nothing of what lay ahead or behind. They emerged onto a balcony that afforded a dizzying view of the land. Just over the peaks to the east, the full moon waited to bathe the world in silver. As Katrina gazed in awe, the horseman took his violin out of the saddlebag and put the instrument to his collarbone. As the first note sang sweetly from the strings, Katrina's breath came out in a long exhalation as the sky wheeled faster. The moon ascended to her dominance, and the stars shone like 1,000 diamonds. The music faded. The horseman had put down his violin and bow. Turning to his saddlebag again, he brought out another violin. He presented it to Katrina, walking toward her. Oh no, I do not play, sir. I have never touched a musical instrument. His arms surrounded her as he placed the violin beneath her chin, curled the fingers of her left hand around the neck, set the bow in her right hand. With the thumb and forefinger, she closed Katrina's eyes. She set his right hand upon hers, the fingers of his left hand upon those of hers, and together they drew the bow across the strings. She felt the music in her bones. Her heart vibrated sympathetically. She lost herself amid the shimmering notes. The melody carried her toward bliss. When the horseman released her and stepped back, it was a moment before she realized she was playing on her own. She stopped, thunderstruck. She wheeled around to face the horseman who stood a good 10 feet away. Her body shook with shock, confusion, not a little fear. Was it joy? What was this? She had never touched a violin before, and now she was playing with the dexterity of a master. Had she been blessed since birth with supernatural talent that only now manifested itself? Or was the horseman enchanting her, preparing her to be his replacement? Accompanist? Despite her apprehension, Katrina felt the smile struggling to stretch her lips. "What is happening?" she whispered. The horseman retrieved his own violin from the floor. He played a few brief notes, and the stars sped more swiftly along their paths before silence fell again, and he waited for her. Katrina knew this was the only answer he would ever give. She put the violin under her chin and raised the bow, but she did not remember how to play until she closed her eyes. Their harmonies sang out into the night, and Katrina felt the sunshine on her skin. She awoke in a bed. Sunlight slanted through stained glass windows, birdsong filtered through the panes. The housekeeper was probably frantic with worry, but Katrina doubted Brom even noticed. She left the chamber and followed a corridor to a wide hall. Several times she called out, "Horseman?" but heard no answer. She went to every doorway she saw and peered through, but none appeared to lead anywhere she particularly wanted to go. Then she saw movement out of the corner of her eye, and she turned to see a headless woman. She was about Katrina's height, or would have been but for the lack of a head. She wore a black high-neck dress and velvet gloves. "Oh, I didn't realize there was..." Katrina had a disturbing thought. "Are you the horseman's wife?" The headless woman waved a hand from side to side. Katrina hoped that meant no, then held out her hands in welcome. Katrina took them, smiling nervously. I don't know if the horseman told you about me. My name is Katrina. He helped me about a fortnight ago when my horse broke a leg, and now he has brought me here." Her mind brimmed with questions, and she asked the first that sprung to mind. "What does he want of me?" The headless woman seemed to consider a moment, and she crooked a finger at Katrina and walked through a doorway. Katrina followed her onto a wide balcony overlooking the lake. Sunlight glanced through the tattered clouds to bathe the snow-capped peaks and glisten on the lake's surface. Clouds flew among the mountains with disturbing speed, the wind that pushed them moaning in the distance. "It's beautiful," Katrina said, smiling. "How..." she began before she could stop herself. The headless woman turned to her, so she had no choice but to forge onward. "How do you see any of this? Or hear it, for that matter?" The headless woman raised two index fingers as she approached. She set her hands on Katrina's shoulders, turned her to face the lake, and closed her eyes with velvet-gloved fingers. Then she put her hands over Katrina's ears. Katrina felt the wind blowing through her hair, the warmth of the sun. The blue of the autumn sky became palpable to her skin. The chirping and warbling of the birds set her bones to quivering. The sensation intensified until she was one with all around her. The headless woman stepped back, and Katrina gaped at her. After that, the colors that met her eyes seemed dull and lifeless. Can anyone do that? Or am I unique? Again, the headless woman beckoned and walked away. They re-entered the castle and walked into a wide audience chamber. Upon a dais stood two tall thrones, to the left of which two boxes of dark mahogany sat on tables, each locked by a silver latch. The headless woman pointed to the box on the left. Katrina opened it slowly. It was a strong, handsome face with high cheekbones. The hairline was somewhat receded, yet Katrina found it attractive nonetheless. She wanted to know the color of his eyes, but felt it would be rude to disturb them. The headless woman stepped back and indicated the other box. Katrina wondered where this was leading. She undid the silver latch and raised the lid. She gasped in horror. The head inside the box was her own. She wheeled to face the headless woman, only to find herself staring at a mirror. And the headless woman was her reflection. Katrina sat bolt upright to find herself in bed. She looked around, her breathing ragged as moonlight slanted through stained glass windows. She felt her neck with her fingers. She hoped it was only a dream. There was only one way to be certain. Eventually, she found the audience chamber. There on the dais were the thrones and the boxes. She didn't bother with the box on the left. Approaching the other as she would a sleeping predator, she reached out, undid the silver latch, and lifted the lid. The box was empty. She gazed at that emptiness until she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and regarded the horseman for a score of heartbeats. I have no wish to trade one prison for another. I want to leave now, please. Without a gesture of objection, the horseman stepped aside. She expected to find the gates closed against her, her mare nowhere to be found. But the mare was right there in the stables, the gates were open wide. The road was hers, all the way to the covered bridge, and beyond. What irked her most was her feeling of disappointment that the horseman made no move to stop her. The first thing Katrina noticed upon returning home was the walls covered with her husband's hunting trophies. How long have I been gone? The housekeeper shrugged. The housekeeper shrugged. Half an hour, perhaps? Over the next few days, she prowled the house like a caged animal. She did all manner of things to distract herself. She helped the housekeeper with the cleaning. She worked with the men in the stables. She worked endless hours in the garden. You're humming Bach again, said the parson, smiling. Has our taciturn fiddler returned? She had not realized she was doing it. She ground her teeth on her curse, threw down her gardening tools, and stormed off. She never went horse riding. That would be just the way to chance upon him. Yet the greatest of all her agonies was that he never came calling out. She looked to the gates every time she heard hoofbeats, but it was always the parson, or a neighboring farmer, or her husband. He did not even glance at her as he rode past. She almost wished the horseman would show himself, so she could hurl curses and invectives, gardening tools, and whatever vegetables lay close by. He never made an appearance, yet neither would he get out of her head. Oh, what an irony that was. Mum! The housekeeper ran up to her in alarm. Oh, Mum! Katrina damned the feeling of hope or excitement now igniting in her. What? Your mare's broken out of a stall. The stable hands were out in force, but they all stood gaping. Katrina was just in time to see the mare leap over the fence and onto the road. Yet almost immediately the mare turned, got a galloping start, and led back into the pasture. Then the mare ran to the top of the high hill, where she stopped and gazed boldly at Katrina. Then she ran down the hill and leapt over the fence again. Each time the mare tossed her mane in winning and celebration. And why shouldn't she? She had been given new life when by all rights she should be dead. And even from where she stood, Katrina saw the scar, reminding her of who was responsible. Katrina pushed herself through the fence and walked under the pasture. She watched the mares gambolling from the foot of the hill, her face expressionless. The mare no longer belonged here. Nor, in truth, did Katrina. What was she to do? Almost involuntarily, she closed her eyes and placed her hands over her ears. She heard two violins, two, no doubt of it, playing Bach for the night spirits of Sleepy Hollow. Every note, every breeze, every shimmering star she felt on her skin. Other things, the friendly smiles of the ghosts, their warm greetings, friendship, camaraderie. Was it love? She felt with her heart. She heard hoofbeats approach and opened her eyes. The white mare regarded her with a solemn eye, as if to say, if you ride me, you know where I will go. Katrina mounted her. Together they jumped over the fence and were off to the covered bridge. When they arrived at the castle, Katrina dismounted at the lakeshore so she could gaze upon the water. The sky was cloudless, the mountains shone in the moonlight. Katrina looked on this tableau and her mind grew calm. Then her fingers happened upon her wedding ring. She took it off and looked at it. Then she drew her hand back and hurled it high and far over the lake. It struck the surface and birthed a ring of water which grew and grew until it touched the shores and disappeared forever. Then she heard footsteps. She turned and regarded the horseman for a moment. Then she said, "I'm not ready yet. I will decide when I'm ready. Do you understand?" The horseman bowed to her. Then he offered his hand in invitation. Always an invitation. As the weeks went by, the horseman was never less than a perfect host. They played their violins often together, and eventually Katrina no longer questioned or wondered about her second-nature talent. He would present her with books of music to show her the titles of the pieces they played. They were mostly Bach, of course, but there were other composers from the Baroque and medieval periods. Katrina lost herself in every one as she played them. Every so often they would ride out through the castle gates and through the covered bridge to entertain the ghosts of Sleepy Hollow. The specters flocked to the road to see them and danced lively to the players' harmonies. Katrina almost wept for joy to see them smile at her, having not experienced this degree of friendship since her marriage. Nor did the horseman neglect her mortal needs. He surprised her with sumptuous feasts laid out on the long table in the dining hall, roasts and breads, soups and intoxicating wines. At first she felt guilty participating in these feasts when her host could not. But as time wore on, she realized that it was no longer necessary to eat the food. She could close her eyes, as she did on the balcony beneath the starry sky, and absorb their smells, indeed, derive sustenance from them through her skin. If this was another way the horseman had of enchanting her, she found she did not mind. She believed she knew him well enough to know that his foremost goal was to make her happy. Then one night, as they stood on the balcony after playing a Renaissance love song, Katrina lowered her violin and bow and simply gazed up at the moon. The music they made together was beautiful, but there were times when silence was required. The horseman approached her softly and put his hand on her shoulders. She leaned back against him, and he put his arms around her waist. She closed her eyes, and in that moment, she realized that the world, to her perception, was exactly as it appeared to her with her eyes open. Indeed, it was far more vivid. She no longer needed eyes to see, or ears to hear, or tongue to taste. Her head was no longer necessary. And at long last, she could see herself spending eternity with the horseman. Nestling against his chest, she whispered, "I'm ready." All the ghosts of Sleepy Hollow were invited. They stood on either side of the aisle as Katrina entered the audience chamber with stately strides, wearing a black dress with black velvet gloves, her auburn tresses bound up so her neck was laid bare. Beside her walked the horseman, clad in his finest dress uniform. By now, every ghost here was Katrina's friend, and she could not help but return their smiles as she walked past. The horseman led her onto the dais like a queen to her coronation. She saw a red velvet cushion and knelt upon it. As the horseman unsheathed his broadsword, she closed her eyes and thought of Bach. The sword swung. Then she took the horseman's hand and rose to stand beside him on the dais. Any questions for that one? Comments? Chuckles? No? Okay.
Couldn't help but think she really lost it. Okay. I have one question.
Okay.
Now, is the horseman when he first appears to her headless?
Yes.
I did not know. I kind of assumed so, but I never really got the impression she was, kind of thinking. Doesn't
Okay.
have a head.
Well, I mean, it's a sequel to Legend of Sleepy Hollow, so when you hear a horseman, I always think headless, but alright, that's something to think about. It's been through 3 revisions already, so what's one more? Okay, let's see. I brought, do you have a copy of The Tale of Roderick Rabbit by Beatrix Potter? We might save that for the encore.
I'll see.
Let's see. Well, some of you may have heard Emissaries from Venus already. It was published in Stupefying Stories a couple years ago. Or we could read from my novel in progress if you want. Any preferences?
Venus.
What?
The Venus one.
Okay.
Emissaries of Venus.
All right. Until I notice any votes, so I guess Emissary from Venus is. It had to be said that the Venusians followed my wife's dress design perfectly. She had sent them via transplanetary telegraph at my request. I had returned some months before from a year-long embassy to Venus on behalf of Her Majesty Queen Victoria, and now the Venusians were returning the courtesy by coming to Earth for a brief audience with the Queen. Artist that my wife was, it was a simple matter for Jenna to drop the dress sketches and insert them into the telegraph box, whereupon they flew through the ether to the Earth's sister planet. But my wife was, quite naturally, curious to know why I felt they had to adopt the Victorian mode of dress. I hesitated. This was a delicate matter. Well, my dear, the climate on Venus is rather tropical, and, well, they have no real lungs, you see. They breathe solely through their skin. Blue skin, am I right? Jenna regarded me with a sidelong glance and a smile that I knew well. I distinctly remember reading that they had blue skin in one of your telegraphs to me. Yes, my dear. And you only had me send designs for women's clothing. Are there no men on Venus? Not that I saw. One does not discuss reproduction on diplomatic missions. She raised an eyebrow, still smiling. Strange that you should tell me that they have blue skin and yet not tell me they wear no clothes. I did not want to upset you unduly. She leaned back against my chest and smiled up at me. I'm sure I was in your thoughts the entire time you were there. I flushed. They are 10 inches tall, Jenna. Yes, I read that in your telegraphs, too. I love my wife with her American way of thinking and her artist's view of the world, but I wish she would not tease me on this matter. This was an important diplomatic endeavor. Possibly all of Britannia was at stake. We were still recovering from the Martian invasion 3 years before, which was laid low by the common cold virus for which we had God literally to thank. And Mars might very well make another attempt. The Venusians, whom I know to be technologically well advanced in many respects, would be a valuable ally. And they were no strangers to Martian aggression themselves. During my stay on Venus, they had shown me entire cities, once soaring constructions wrought of milk-white stone, that had been reduced to cinders under the baleful eye of the Martian death ray. I also saw their breathtaking monuments erected to the millions of lives lost. Aside from the Venusians' prowess in military technology, excuse me. Aside from the Venusians' prowess in military technology, the biggest obstacle to a Martian conquest of Earth, or for that matter the reverse, was the distance between the two planets, which prohibited the delivery of the supplies required for a sustained invasion. The Earth would make a convenient stepping stone between the two, which might explain why Mars invaded our planet, just as the results of that invasion might explain why such an endeavor had not been attempted more often. So Venus, perhaps learning from their enemies' experience, extended the olive branch of diplomacy, inviting us to their planet before they came to ours. I eagerly volunteered to be the first man to travel to Venus, and I shall cherish that experience for the rest of my life. Though the considerable differences between our respective cultures led to many moments of embarrassment which the necessities of my position as ambassador forced me to hide. And now the ship descended on the immense field of grass where Her Majesty Queen Victoria waited with her retinue, accompanied by me and my wife. Jenna had been commissioned to produce artwork to commemorate the event and a broader sketchpad. The first Royal Zeppelin fleet surrounded the field, a ceremonial show of force. I had caught a cold that morning, but I braved the elements for the sake of diplomacy and sniveled as surreptitiously as I could. The Venusian ship settled to the ground, a great silver ball supported by 4 cylindrical rocket motors, and its main hatch opened. The Venusians emerged. And to my unutterable horror, I saw what they had done with my wife's designs. As I said, they had followed them perfectly. The tailoring was immaculate. The fabric, I would later learn, was the finest Venusian silk. They had done absolutely nothing wrong, except that the dresses were tailored to human, not Venusian, dimensions. It seemed that they had constructed human-sized, human-shaped, walking apparati, which they had clothed with their human-sized dresses. The Venusians rode and steered these apparati from within clear glass domes, doubtless containing their native atmosphere, which protruded upward from the high-neck collars. The Venusians themselves stood unclothed and unconcealed. Their bright blue skin shone in the cold gray of the English morning. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the humans gathered there. Her Majesty remained stone-faced as usual, but there was no doubting her thoughts. My discomfort must have shown, for Jenna clasped my hand and said, Silence reigned as the Venusian delegation approached Her Majesty. Then, as one, the mechanical apparati stopped their advance and made a perfect obeisance. The delegation leader spoke in a low, I hesitate to say sultry voice, giving greeting to the Queen. Her Majesty replied with her accustomed cool civility, welcoming the delegation to Earth. After some polite conversation, we all retreated indoors for the formal reception. The discussions proceeded reasonably well under the circumstances. Her Majesty was the only member of the human faction to speak. Everyone else stood to attention, looking in all directions save that of the Venusians. I attended to my duties as well as I could, but then I felt the onset of a sneeze and I had to excuse myself. I retreated to a window. It was an extremely violent sneeze. It escaped me before the handkerchief reached my face. I'm afraid I got some spray onto the glass. Are you all right, James? My wife had asked as she approached. I wiped my nose and pocketed the handkerchief, as well as can be expected, I suppose. Dear, Jenna said as she clasped my arm again, everything will be fine. Earth needs its alliance. She looked back to the negotiations, and I think the Venusians know that. Mr. Hodgins? An apparatus approached, and I recognized Lygian, a Venusian with bright red hair who had attended to me through most of my time on Venus. Good day to you. I just wanted to say how good it is to see you again. And it is good to see you, Lygian, I replied. And it was indeed good to see an old friend, the situation notwithstanding. Jenna nudged my ribs, and so I introduced them. Ah, Mrs. Hodgins, Lygian said. I must thank you for the dress designs you sent us. They were most helpful. My pleasure, Jenna replied. I like what you've done with them. Did they share a conspiratorial smile? So what do you think of Earth so far? Jenna asked. Beautiful, said Lygian, out of more, I like to think, than mere diplomatic politeness. And your Royal Zeppelin fleet is most impressive, though we of Venus believe there's something to be said for subtlety. She looked at the window, then back at Jenna. Are you an artist by profession? Jenna nodded. Art is highly esteemed on my planet. You would be most welcome to come to Venus and work your craft there. I would very much like that, but... She struggled to keep the mischievous smile from her face. Would you be so kind as to pose for me for a few minutes? I know you built these apparatus specifically for this event, and I must get a detailed sketch of at least one of them. Lygian smiled. Certainly. I left these new friends to each other and returned to the negotiations. After the Venusians had departed, I approached Her Majesty to apologize for the unseemly display which she had been forced to see. We require no apology from you, she said. You sent them designs for appropriate attire, and they received them. That much is clear. It is equally as clear that they are a species lacking any modesty or propriety. They simply have no sense of such things. Nevertheless, they will be valuable allies in our dealings with the planet Mars. You have done well, Mr. Hodgins. You will be commended. With a sense of great relief, I joined my wife aboard the carriage bound for home. All will be well, Jenna, I said, smiling. Her Majesty has shown considerable understanding. The alliance is secure. I shall simply have to communicate my intent more clearly in my future dealings with the Venusians. Jenna smiled sidelong at me. Oh, you goose. I furrowed my brow. What? James, she said, they understood your intent perfectly. They merely subverted it. You saw their technology, it's decades ahead of ours. Do you really think they would have the sensibilities of a tribe of cave dwellers? Sensibilities? I stared flabbergasted. Jenna, they wear no clothes! Because that is their custom, dear. Their customs are not our customs. James, Britannia is not the end-all, be-all of existence. Not their existence, anyway. She laughed lightly. They were probably most amused to learn they were expected to conform to our social mores, when we clearly needed the alliance more than they. How can you be so sure? Didn't you see them? They were daring the Queen to notice them the whole time, and she did not even realize she was being mocked. The blood drained out of my face. Mocked? Dear, Jenna grasped my hand and kissed me. Everything will be all right. As you said, the alliance is secure. She looked out the carriage window. They may simply have been testing us. If we can't put aside our preconceptions for the sake of planetary survival, then perhaps we don't deserve to survive. Jenna made two paintings to commemorate the arrival of the Venusian delegation on Earth. One depicted Lygian, exactly as she had posed, standing atop her walking apparatus, which was clothed in that perfectly tailored Victorian dress made from the finest Venusian silk. This she kept in the room where she did most of her painting, and covered it up when we had visitors. The other, official painting, which Jenna sent to Buckingham Palace, depicted Her Majesty shaking hands with the apparatus in which rode the leader of the Venusian delegation. It was in this painting that Jenna had made one small change. On the Venusian leader, Jenna had placed butterfly wings? Of course, said Jenna. Go to any art museum and you will see hardly any unclothed women, but a number of unclothed fairies. Somehow the butterfly wings make it all not offensive in the least. She smiled. I restrained propriety by making the Venusian a figure in a children's book. Weeks later, we had received word that this official painting had been accepted by Her Majesty and would be displayed, and the artist would be well rewarded for her efforts. Mrs. Hodgins is to be commended. Mrs. Hodgins is to be commended for her tact and her judiciousness in using it, the Queen wrote in a message which we were instructed never to reveal to our new allies. The application of these qualities helped the Venusian delegation to save face after they had committed a potentially disastrous faux pas. When she read this, Jenna's high-pitched, helpless laughter rang throughout the house. I decided to go for a walk in the garden, but then I saw butterflies among the flowers and changed my mind. Months passed without any word from Venus. Then the following message arrived by a transplanetary telegraph. To our friends on Earth, our humblest apologies for our lack of correspondence over the last few months. We can only say that a recent military project has consumed most of our time. It may interest you to know that during our visit to our beautiful planet, we obtained a specimen of the contagion, we believe you call it the cold virus, which halted the Martian invasion of your planet 3 of your years ago. We reproduced this contagion in our laboratories and sent the resulting weapon by a rocket ship to Mars. The entire Martian population is no more. You have nothing more to fear from them. In the interest of interplanetary relations, we propose the establishment of permanent embassies on each other's planets, for the sake of diplomacy and communication. For the position of ambassador to Venus, may we humbly suggest Mr. James Hodgins, with whom we have already established a rapport during his previous visit to our planet, and whom we know to be well-meaning. We also strongly recommend that he be accompanied by his wife, Mrs. Jenna Hodgins. As an artist, she will be highly esteemed on our planet, and we believe that she will be extremely conducive to Earth-Venus relations. We look forward to your reply. With kindest regards, the Venusian ruling body. So, questions, comments, gripes, chuckles? Yeah, we have a chuckle.
I have a chuckle.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that one, as I said, that one was sold to Stupefying Stories, so... Yeah. Anyway. Okay, so we've done Katrina, we've done... How much time we got, Eric?
Okay, 10 minutes, you got time for Roderick.
Okay.
Release Woodward.
The very last page. They save the best for last. Okay. The Tale of Roderick Rabbit by Beatrix Stoker. Once upon a time there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Lenore, Morella, Madeline, and Roderick. They lived with their mother near an old iron fence under the root of a very big yew tree. Now children, their mother said one evening, you may go to church or stay here and do your homework, but don't go into Carfax Abbey. Your father had a bit of a mishap there. Count Dracula got hold of him and he was never seen again. Now be off with you and stay out of trouble. I have errands to run. Then old Mother Rabbit took her crucifix, a wristlet of garlic, and another wristlet of wolfsbane, and went through the iron fence to Frau von Tiggenwinkel's, the old hedgehog who told fortunes alongside of her bustling laundry business. Mother Rabbit had had a dream of an apple that fell from a yew tree into an open grave. It troubled her, so she wanted to ask Frau von Tiggenwinkel's opinion of it. Lenore, Morella, and Madeline, who were sensible rabbits, all stayed home and did their homework. But Roderick, who was not very bright, ran straight to Carfax Abbey and squeezed through a hole in the stone wall. First he ate some daisies and some wild thistles, and then, feeling a stomach ache coming on, decided to go home to ask Mother Rabbit for some medicine. Around the corner of the stone building, who should he meet but Count Dracula? Count Dracula was on his hands and knees drawing unholy symbols in the dirt. But then he looked up at Roderick and said, "Welcome to my house. Come freely, go safely, and eat something of the happiness you bring." Roderick was very scared. He turned and ran all over Carfax Abbey, having forgotten how to get back to the hole in the wall. He lost one of his shoes in a thorn bush, and the other shoe in the root of an oak tree. When he lost the shoes, he ran on all fours and made better speed. He might have got clean away had he not tried to run through another thorn bush and got caught by the big buttons on his jacket. It was a red jacket with silver buttons. Mother Rabbit had bought it for 6 pence at the corner store. Roderick thought he was done for, and he cried big, wet tears. But his cries were overheard by a nearby raven, who flew to him very quickly, telling him not to be frightened and that everything would be all right. But Roderick saw what he was trying to do, and dodged just in time to avoid the beak that was darting for his eye. Then Count Dracula came up, and, grabbing Roderick, planted his fangs firmly in his neck. But Roderick thought quickly, plucked a silver button from his jacket, and poked Count Dracula in the eye with it. Count Dracula shrieked and dropped Roderick, who ran away as fast as he could, never looking back until he reached his home under the yew tree. He was so tired from exertion and blood loss that he collapsed on the dirt floor of the rabbit hole. Mother Rabbit did not even look up from the wooden stake she was carving. Frau von Tiggenwinkel had given her a very clear interpretation of her dream and very clear instructions. But, just to be sure, she checked Roderick's teeth as he lay on the ground. They had grown longer and sharper. Roderick was turning into a vampire rabbit. So Mother Rabbit hammered the wooden stake through his chest, then burned his body in the pyre she had set up outside. Then she mixed the ashes with holy water she had borrowed from the church, put them in a silver urn, and buried it in the backyard next to Roderick's father. Then Mother Rabbit went back into her rabbit hole and had a supper of baby carrots and strawberries with Lenore, Morella, and Madeline.
Kind of sentimental.
What's the moral of this story? I don't understand.
Well, like Mother Rabbit said, don't go into Carfax Abbey.
Yeah.
It's discipline.
Do it. Always do as your parents tell you, Dex.
Right. This one be incinerated and put in a silver.
And do we have time yet still, or?
That's kind of big.
Well, it's How Beowulf Saved Christmas, that poem I read last year.
Okay, sure, do it.
Okay. I don't know how many of you heard this, but this is my own translation of Beowulf from the Old English. How Beowulf Saved Christmas. Every Dane down in Heorot liked Christmas a lot, but Grendel, who lived just north of Heorot, did not. Old Grendel loathed Christmas, I'm sorry to say, and the reason he loathed it was plainer than day. For each Christmas morning the Danes they would wake, and their tummies they'd fill, and their thirst they would slake. And then they would raise all their voices in song, a loud raucous chorus, some 56 strong. And the noise of the singing would reach Grendel's hovel, and beat on his ears like the blade of a shovel. And year after year things went like this until one year he decided that he'd had his fill. So late on a Christmas Eve, Grendel stole forth from the cave where he lived with his mom in the north. And down to Heorot old Grendel he flew, and half of the 56 sleepers he slew. Their skulls he broke open like so many eggs, and he ripped off some arms, and he ripped off some legs. Then back to his hovel old Grendel he sped, and King Hrothgar mourned over 28 dead. And then, when dawn came, there was found more unpleasance. Old Grendel, that monster, had stolen their presents. This has gone far enough, old King Hrothgar declared. I want that fiend slaughtered with no expense spared. Go find me a hero, he said to his men, and until you find one, don't come back again. They searched north, they searched east, they searched south, they searched west. They searched the whole world at King Hrothgar's behest. Their search went through rain and through snow and through fog. They searched every mountain and searched every bog. They searched low, they searched high, they searched far, they searched near, till Christmas time once again slowly drew near. And then, on a winter's morn, who should they meet but a strapping young lad from the land of the Geats. The man's name was Beowulf, known far and near, for strength like an ox's and knowing no fear. He sailed down to Heorot to Hrothgar the sad, because in the past he had helped out his dad. And when he set foot on that cold Danish shore, he said unto Hrothgar, don't fret any more. I'll slaughter this Grendel, this monster you fear, and butcher his carcass as I would a deer. And I'll bring back your presents to Heorot, you'll see. And to top it all off, I won't charge you a fee. Good man, said King Hrothgar, that ruler so old. A deed like that would be worth mountains of gold. So when shall we start? It is that time of year, when he comes to ruin our good Christmas cheer. We'll wait until nightfall, said Beowulf. Then we'll be waiting in ambush when he comes again. Before that, I want you to break out your wine, and sing ribald songs and make merry and dine. And when Grendel comes to make bloodshot and gore, I'll give him a thrashing like never before. So into the mead hall, the Danes and the Geats retreated for cookies and other good treats. They opened their throats and sang many a song, till the red sun sank westward and shadows grew long. And Grendel, that meanie, up north in his pit, he heard all that ruckus and threw quite a fit. I thought I had taught them a lesson, he roared, when I went to that place and left 28 gourd. But I guess I'll just have to go back there post-haste, and tear down that mead hall and lay it to waste. So back down to Heorot old Grendel he trotted, with visions of carnage and Hrothgar garroted. But when he arrived there with rage in his eyes, old Beowulf gave him a nasty surprise. He thought he was sleeping, did Grendel. Instead, old Beowulf lay quite awake in his bed. As Grendel reached for him to tear out his spleen, our hero struck hard with a strength never seen. They kicked and they punched and they scratched and they swore, and Beowulf bashed Grendel's head with a door. They wrestled and grappled and tussled and fought, until Grendel slipped and he had his arm caught. And Grendel, he grimaced and hollered in pain. He struggled, but all of his struggles were vain. Old Beowulf's craftiness worked like a charm. Before Grendel knew it, he'd ripped off his arm. And Grendel, he blubbered and gibbered in agony, as he fled in disgrace between doors of mahogany. And then everybody from where they were hid crept out, and they saw what old Beowulf did. And then everybody... Okay. And then all the Danes in the gates gave a cheer. They cried, "Merry Christmas and Happy New Year!" But their cheers, I'm afraid, were a bit premature. For Grendel, though dying, fled over the moor. And back to his mother up north in his den, he fell on the floor, never moving again. And old Grendel's mom, at the death of her child, raised a shriek to the skies and began running wild. And with nary a thought for her hide nor her head, to Herod, while everyone slept like the dead, she ran, and when everyone rose with the dawn, they saw one of Beowulf's kinsmen was gone. "Not again, not again," old King Hrothgar exclaimed. "Can't we have just one Christmas with nobody maimed?" "Never fear," said her hero, "that hag I will slay. I was going to hike to their cave anyway, to bring back her presents which old Grendel stole. Now let's find his mother deep down in her hole." So early next morning, that hero so bold rode out with his men through the late winter's cold. And with him rode Hrothgar and many brave Danes. Together they rode over snow-covered plains. In the midst of a swamp they found old Grendel's dwelling, a swamp that was murky and most evil-smelling. Our hero dismounted and, "Wait here," he said. "I'll fight Grendel's mother and she will be dead." So into that hovel old Beowulf strode, and there in the darkness she sat like a toad. The mother of Grendel, she lay there in wait, and looked on our hero with fury and hate. She leaped for his throat, but he dodged to one side. With talons she sought to flay Beowulf's hide. They punched and they grabbed and they kicked and they swore, until Grendel's mom was a corpse on the floor. Outside of the cave, old King Hrothgar was burdened. "That greatest of men is a goner for certain. It has been far too long, we must leap to his aid. A brave man is not one who's never afraid." But just as they made up their minds to be brave, old Beowulf stepped out of old Grendel's cave. And everyone there gave a cheer in his presence, for in that man's arms were the Danes' Christmas presents. They rode back to Heorot with many a song. They ate and they reveled all Christmas day long. So when you're partaking of good Christmas cheer, remember what Beowulf did on that year.